This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here after an exciting, interesting Week 9 of Big Ten football. We had some really interesting results, maybe some really interesting injuries. Tripp here as well could shape not only the upcoming weeks, but the rest of the season as well. You went to Madison. You seemingly have survived Madison. Back here with us, we have Matt Fortuna coming on of the Inside Zone to give us a national perspective on the Big Ten and some of the teams that we've been talking about now for the last few weeks. We have Hot or Not, a debut episode here, or a debut segment, I should say. So you want to stick around for that. We got a really, really good pod here for you on a Monday. Tripp, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. I know you had a relaxing spa weekend, so you're rejuvenated and ready to go. But you look at this, and now you go into November. Hard to believe. We're beginning November. The clocks are going to change at the end of the week. But you have Penn State and Ohio State, a top 5 matchup. The Buckeyes battling injuries, survive against Nebraska. Penn State battling injuries with a backup quarterback, prevail with a great second half on the road against Wisconsin. Indiana battling injuries, becoming a theme right now this time of year. No surprise. Indiana, maybe not a great performance from Taven Jackson, but another really dominant win for the Hoosiers. And things, the top of the Big Ten, there still is no change. Oregon, Penn State, Indiana unbeaten, Ohio State 1 loss, and 4 teams that have a great shot at a college football playoff. And then a few other teams in the Big Ten that I think have to feel really good about the weekend that they had. Nebraska, a huge bounce back in a losing effort. Minnesota is rolling right now. And you look at 2 of their 3 losses this year by really 1 score in games that they could have won. So I think it's turning into a pretty good year for the Golden Gophers. Just a lot of different elements that we can talk about here this week. And of course, want to recap of the spa weekend.
Oh, we will get to that, I promise. How about Michigan maybe finding a quarterback? Like the 4th quarterback change seems to maybe be the charm. We got a lot to get into, like you said. Biggest story, though, Trip, coming out of week number 9 is Ohio State. Like you said, Nebraska played a lot better than they did, let's say, last week in Bloomington, but still did not result in a win. But you come out of this game looking at Ohio State, how they played in this game where they really struggled to run the football all game long, where their offensive line suffered another injury. And now you're looking at that beleaguered unit, which came in as easily the biggest question mark, or if not the 1A biggest question mark to quarterback for Ohio State. And now you're going into a colossal game in Happy Valley on Saturday with questions about the offensive line, Trip, that may right now doom their season.
And I know we're going to dive into this matchup extensively during the course of the week and probably this podcast because we can't just help ourselves. But that offensive line for Ohio State going against what really is one of the strengths of Penn State's defense and one of the top defensive units in all of college football is that defensive line with Abdul Carter. Now, deny Dennis Sutton getting banged up in the Wisconsin game. What is his status for the weekend? But then Devon J. Thomas, Alonzo Ford, who had a great game for Penn State at Wisconsin at defensive tackle, and of course, Zane Durant, who's been the best defensive tackle for Penn State all season against that Ohio State offensive line. So first things first, Ohio State survives, winning 21-17. Zen Mikuleski, he allowed 2 sacks. He got hurt. So then you're moving Donovan Jackson out from guard to tackle because they really don't have any other tackles right now that they could go to. So it's forced Ryan Day and Chip Kelly to go deep down the depth chart. And now you're starting to move pieces again. I think this week for Ohio State, it's figuring out what is the best alignment that gives us an opportunity, number one, to protect Will Howard going into that game against Penn State. And this is where having a guy like Howard is very beneficial because I thought he used his legs incredibly well against Nebraska to buy some time. And when they needed a drive, right, they fell behind in that game and they needed a drive. To their credit, they were able to put together a game-winning touchdown drive to retake the lead. But not only protecting Howard, what can they do to establish some semblance of a run game after Penn State just shut down Tyree Walker this past weekend for Wisconsin, Ohio State season low in rushing yards, 2.1 yards per carry as a team. Judkins, 10 carries, 29 yards. Henderson, 10 carries, 25 yards. But it all stems from up front. And if you can't win in the trenches, especially in the Big Ten, you are in big trouble. And Ohio State has some serious question marks along the offensive line. And to take it another step forward, if those issues continue and they compound themselves, and all of a sudden you're a 2-loss Ohio State team that doesn't look good, albeit your 2 losses on the road at Oregon and at Penn State, we went from talking about national title favorites to can they even make the college football playoff? I don't think that's that far-fetched of a discussion to start having.
No, you're not at all. And that's why if you look on YouTube, if you watch on YouTube, you see the lower third we have. But if you're listening on audio, don't worry, I'll read it for you. The question is what's the level of concern right now for the Buckeyes after this game? And for me, it's high, Trip. Like if you have a scale 1 to 10, I'm putting the level of concern at like an 8, 8.5, maybe even a 9, because the offensive line questions you're talking about, you mentioned it. The depth on the offensive line is not great at all. Left tackle, especially, is probably their weakest position up front of the 5. There's no one you're sliding in that's going to just be a guy that's plug and play. There's really not many options Ohio State has right now in this roster this season to fix this need immediately in the span of 5 days before you go on the road to a hostile environment to another great defensive line you're just going to play. You saw that great defensive line for Nebraska that was manhandled, by the way, the week before against Indiana, dominate up front. I mean, 2.1 yards per carry. Judkins and Henderson, I would still argue, is the best running back duo in the country. They are much better than 2.1 yards per carry, but you can't run anywhere if there are no holes open. And so if you look at Ohio State and you see this offensive line just right now folding and impacting everything else on the offense, I mean, Trip, like you watch them, the level of talent is maybe the highest it's ever been on this team. But with that said, this feels like the most vulnerable Buckeyes team we've seen really since 2011. The year Luke Fickell took over and they were 6-7. I don't remember, especially at this point in the season, a more vulnerable, beatable Buckeyes team since that 2011 year than the one we're watching right now in 2024.
And I agree with you. It's going to be interesting because a team with that much skill position talent, though, has the ability to overcome injuries. And I would think this week, Ryan Day and Chip Kelly, the entire goal of the week is figuring out what can we do schematically to help address these concerns. And even if Zen comes back, it's not like he played well at tackle. And then I also think you have to have the discussion, even if he does come back, is that still your best option? And they did a good job of addressing a concern by bringing in Simmons and McLaughlin, the center. And it looked like if they stayed healthy and they battled that sickness during camp along the line, they felt like, okay, we got a lot of guys experience. If they stayed healthy, I think the line was improved enough and they played well, the line, against Oregon for the most part. Now, they didn't run the ball great, but they still played well against a really good Oregon team. They protected Howard, they gave him an opportunity, and that's a game they easily could have won. Now, 1 week later, all of a sudden you have these question marks again. And the other thing to consider in this game too, remember Ohio State was coming off a bye week. A bye week, we tend to look at usually as a positive reset, refresh. Sometimes you can be a little slow, especially after your first loss of the season going cross country. Sometimes after a bye week, you can be a little bit sluggish coming off a bye. Like you lose momentum, you lose routine. It's not necessarily a good thing. And Nebraska had just played the week before, had just got the doors blown off the week before. I think going into the game, things set up well for Nebraska because of that to begin with. And then you had a Nebraska team, which one of its strengths is its front seven defensively against, it was a good matchup for them. And to credit Nebraska, they played well. That was a really good bounce back for Matt Rule's team, where it looked like things were starting to go the wrong direction for them.
No, it absolutely was. And you're right. They played well. But now, if you look ahead now, if you're Ohio State with this matchup, and Penn State, obviously, right, we'll see about the health of Dennis Sutton, who got hurt, looked to be a groin injury, did not play for a majority of the second half. We'll see if he's able to go. Abdul Carter, you mentioned, is one of the premier edge rushers, just disruptors in all of college football. and up front, Penn State defensive tackles has gotten better and stronger. You have to believe, right, that they're going to pin their ears back and try to come after Will Howard as much as possible and not really respecting the run game. And if you're Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, like I think at this point, you have to do what most opponents have done to Penn State so far this year. Get the ball out quick. 3-step drops, slants, screens, and just try as much as you can to slow down that pass rush of Penn State. Because otherwise, you look at this game, part of the reason why the run game is so important is not just because that's, I think, the strength of their team. And that's part of the reason why you brought Chip Kelly over to call plays, is he is a savant when it comes to running the football. But it's also, I think, to kind of set up the offense. And you look at this game, you run for 2.1 yards per carry. It's no coincidence that Ohio State in this game was 1 of 10 on third down. They faced third and longs, even on third and shorts a few times, could not get the first down whatsoever. They tried to run up the middle. They got bullied. They got shut down. You got to expect a totally different game plan here for your Penn State this weekend, just purely out of necessity for Ohio State. Because right now, if they try to just line up and beat you, like I think they tried to do against Oregon, and again, lost by 1 point, but they tried to do against Nebraska and were lucky to escape that Saturday with a win, you're going to get beat handily by Penn State if you just try to line up and beat them straight up.
It also puts a lot of pressure on your defense when you're not converting on third downs. Nebraska had the ball for 35 minutes time of possession in this game. That defense held Nebraska to 3 field goals, had a couple of calls go their way as well defensively. But a lot more pressure than falls on the Ohio State defense. Is it sustainable? And now that defense just played, I don't have the snap count in front of me, but being on the field for so long against Nebraska, that has a carryover effect to the next weekend as well. The question too, and I thought he played well against Oregon and probably deserved to win. Your confidence level in Will Howard after this game?
It's less just because I just don't think if you put it all on him, he's a quarterback that's good enough to win the game for you. And up until the point of the season, the Oregon game was the worst rushing attack that Ohio State had all season. They averaged 4.3 yards per carry, which again is immensely better than what they just did on Saturday. But you saw that offense. They only scored 21 points in part because they were so one-dimensional that when you rely on Will Howard, I just don't think he's good enough when everybody knows you're passing. Even though these receivers are great, I don't think he's good enough if you can drop back 35, 40 times to pick your part, to make the right decision every time, put the ball only where his receiver can get it, and move the chains consistently. And so if they can't run the ball anywhere near as well as they were running it really up until 2 weeks ago against lesser competition, I don't think, if you're Ohio State, I guess I'll put it this way. You never brought Will Howard in to be your savior, right? You just brought him to be a better version of Kyle McCord, where the run game will be there, the defense will be there. Just make 2 or 3, 4 throws a game and we'll be fine. Well, now if you're asking to make 10 throws a game, 12 throws a game on the road, I don't think that's a game plan at all for Ohio State to have success here. How about you?
Yeah, he has a little more mobility than Kyle McCord. And I think going into at least the Oregon game, and especially this week, the question was, did we make the right decision there? And then I think a lot of people saw Kyle McCord's performance this week and are like, okay, I think we're okay. Wow. Will Howard, the interesting thing too is, he's from Pennsylvania, and he said after he already started turning the page right after the Nebraska game, he said, I can't wait to go back to Pennsylvania and Penn State. He said, quote, it's going to be a homecoming for me. I grew up a Penn State fan. I wanted to go there my whole life. They didn't think I was good enough, but I guess we'll see next week if I was. So interesting comments from the Ohio State quarterback after the game. And, this is the Ohio State perspective. Penn State was pushed too over the weekend game I was at in Madison, the 28-13 win over Wisconsin. Penn State trailed at the half. Question marks who's going to play at quarterback coming out in the second half. And it ends up being, Drew Aller came out with a brace on his left leg, tried to give it a go, warmed up, and eventually took the helmet off, took the brace off. You could see he was emotional on the sideline, stayed on the sideline, was smiling during that second half as his backup, Bo Prabula, led the team back. But the question was, who's going to play quarterback in the second half? And now the big question for Penn State, coming out of what was an impressive, gutsy, culture-type win that they talked about, is who's going to be the quarterback this week when Penn State takes on Ohio State. But first things first, Prabula, he got the job done, and Penn State got the job done in Madison.
I want to ask you first, because you were obviously on the sidelines, right? You were there. You were kind of seeing it all in real time unfold. What were the emotions like? Because there was uncertainty, maybe an assumption, okay, Drew's going to play. He's walking off the field. And then all of a sudden, second half, like you said, he tries to warm up, doesn't play. very emotional. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, it's Bo time. Let's go here. What were the emotions like on the sidelines? Just kind of seeing that unfold. We see the quarterback change happen. The first few drives are not going as planned. I'm sure a lot of Penn State fans thought, here we go again. We've seen plenty of backup quarterbacks come in and really just struggle, and the season kind of just falls out from under you because the backup quarterback's not ready. What was it kind of like to see that from your perspective on the sideline, of the emotions and the belief on the sideline?
I think it's a team that has unwavering belief, and there's something unique about their personalities this year. And Aller and Denai Dennis Sutton, even after they went out, were still there and very much involved as leaders on the sideline. A lot of the credit for me goes to Andy Kotelnicki. And the game plan that they had with Drew Aller is obviously different than you're going to have with Bo Prabula, and you're going to play to his strengths. But Penn State had a really difficult time running the football in the first half. And Bo Prabula has a strength to his game. It is his legs. And he helped unlock that running game in the second half for Penn State. And I think Andy Kotelnicki did a really good job using that RPO game, kind of that option game, and playing to Prabula's strength. And Prabula made some plays, like, not to take credit away from him. Prabula made a throw to Harrison Wallace. He was patient. A big thing for Bo is not turning the ball over for him. But he played extremely well. But Andy Kotelnicki, to adjust his game plan, I think was really impressive. And you can see the coordinator hires that Penn State made. And obviously the pick six started to change that game. But then once Penn State got the momentum off the pick six from Jalen Reed, Prabula settled in, they settled in, and I think they wore Wisconsin down. But the coordinator hires they made, and Allen and particularly Kotelnicki, really paid off in that performance.
You're absolutely right. And look, I have been mostly an optimistic person. So sometimes I will get blinded by my optimism and believe Penn State's a better team than they truly are. Maybe get too excited and think that they can win some games that they can't. And so I try to make a conscious effort this season to say, you know what? Look, the goal is just make the playoff. From there, I'll be happy. I didn't think they could beat Ohio State. I just was cautiously optimistic here about this season. And so I have maybe been slower to kind of go all in. But you look at the last 2 weeks with how they won at USC. Again, that's not with how USC has played. It's not going to be like a sterling resume builder. But I think that's a character, mental fortitude, development sort of win. And then you roll that over in this week where you're on the road, night game at Wisconsin, who's playing well, granted against lesser competition, but still they're playing their best football this season. And you lose your quarterback at halftime. You're trailing at halftime. You've turned only 7 points with how well they played on offense is like, you're kind of like, okay, we left a lot of points on the board here. And you start to see early on in the third quarter, Bo's a little rushed. Maybe the offense is truly like still trying to get used to a new quarterback, and then go 3 and outs, not really move the ball. And then all of a sudden, really once the pick six happen, but then you have Bo Prabula and co kind of start the fourth quarter driving down the field and get a touchdown. You kind of felt like, okay, we're good. Here we go. And I think this is a Penn State team that truly is maybe the toughest and the deepest in the James Franklin era, or at least maybe since 2016, because they are now having guys consistently not only step up, but step up in big moments on the road in some big games where the season, maybe not on the line per se, because again, the 12-team playoff, one loss doesn't doom you, but I mean, you're down by double digits on the road at USC in a game which you are favored. You're trailing at halftime to a Wisconsin team that you are favored by. It's easy. I think we've seen in previous years, those teams kind of fold under that pressure, and kind of when things don't go well, say, okay, you know what, we'll get them next week. This team fights, and there's like a real belief, grittiness, toughness that I think that you got to give Penn State a lot of credit for, that they've been maybe missing, and partly because of the lack of depth in previous years, that I think makes them one of the most dangerous teams in the country.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, right, everyone would want to see your team, whoever it may be, win every game the way Indiana has so far. And if you look at Penn State's resume, as you talked about, there's not any games in particular that really jump out just based on the opponent. I think USC is still an incredibly talented team, and they found a way to come from behind there. I think Wisconsin's played well recently, and they came into the weekend in 4th place in the Big Ten. So I think there's always, it's a catch-22. Oh, Penn State, they won, but they didn't look dominant. And how good really was that opponent anyway? And, there's no question that if you're Texas to this point, Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon is the best example of it. For the most part, you're beating teams and beating them pretty easily.
Right.
Penn State's had some adversity, but I don't think, to your point, I don't view that as a negative about Penn State this year. I view that as a positive about Penn State because you can point to, for Penn State fans, don't need to outline it for them, but for other people listening, 2021 at Iowa, Taquan Roberson comes in. Penn State's an undefeated top 5 team, I think, at the time, and Sean Clifford goes out, and they had no chance. But, now they have a quarterback who's experienced and prepared, and a quarterback in a day and age of college football that most backups would have transferred somewhere else to start. Well, Penn State kept Bo Pribula and gave him a role in the offense and kept him, and he's a Penn State guy, but kept him here. And now for a situation like that, it wasn't doom and gloom. They found a way. They're deeper. They lost a first-round pick, fourth-round pick, and a fifth-round pick on their offensive line from last year. Their offensive line this year is better. Their offensive line was without its starting tackle, Anthony Donko, in that game in the second half. Well, Nolan Rucci transferred in from Wisconsin, and they still didn't miss a beat. To your point, I think it's a deep character. There's something special. It may not always look pretty. It's not always flashy, but I think that's the most impressive thing about Penn State right now is how they're getting it done with some of the obstacles and adversity that they've faced. And to do it in a season where very few teams are left unbeaten, they have found a way to remain unbeaten.
And I like the fact that I thought they got off to better starts offensively and defensively in the first half, which has been a bugaboo for this team. I know they're trailing, but I thought it was a better start on both sides.
I thought it was a fluky first half. I thought for the most part they did a good job on Walker. They had a call go against them. They had a punt that was going to be blocked, and the punter makes an unbelievable off-script play. They moved the ball a couple of times, and Fleming had a drop inside the 10. It would have been a touchdown. I thought it was a fluky first half where they played pretty well, but the score just wasn't on their side. And, you just felt like at some point they're going to take over this game. But then the dynamics shifted dramatically when Aller got hurt and Dennis Sutton got hurt and Donko was out of the game. The dynamics shifted so much that, it wasn't the same game in the second half, but they still, probably because of their run game and what they were able to do to stop Walker running for Wisconsin and ultimately put the pressure in the game on Braden Locke for Wisconsin's offense. And once they were behind the sticks, I think everyone in the stadium knew a pick six was coming on that play from Reed because Locke was wildly inconsistent. He's been mistake prone all year. And on a play where he didn't need to force it, his team's ahead, just kick the ball because Wisconsin dominated field position the entire game. He's the one who changed the course of the game. And, you talk about depth as well as Locke maybe played in the games against Rutgers and Purdue. I feel like Penn State didn't just have the better starting quarterback. Pribula was better than Locke. And after watching Locke, I wouldn't be surprised if Ethan Grunkemeyer is better than Locke too.
No, you're right. And it's encouraging too, Trip, is like these wins, like we talked about, are not sexy. They're not like you look at the regular season, look back and say, oh man, and that was one of the best wins of the season against UNC, USC, or Wisconsin. But I think what they are, you kind of mentioned before about character building wins. Like these wins, I think go a long way come playoff time here. Because it's not going to be pretty. You're going to be in some hostile environments. And not that USC is the most hostile environment. Even we'll get to your thoughts on Wisconsin and that environment. But it's like you're facing adversity, right? Like you're not going to go into the playoff, win every game, have everything go your way. You're going to suffer an injury. You're going to be trailing. And I think it's encouraging so far to see that in these last 2 games for Penn State, not only have they been down, they got some bad breaks, some bad turnover luck, some bad injury luck go against them, but they've been resilient enough to bounce back. Nobody panics. And like we're seeing now with the depth, next man up is truly playing out in front of us where there is belief that, hey, even if we don't have our A guy here, our B guy is just as good. He's going to come in here and make plays and everything just keeps on rolling. I think to your point, Andy Kotelnicki does make that easier. But I think these are like playoff caliber wins where if we're looking at Penn State, let's say they're in the Final Four here 2 months from now. I think you can look back on these last 2 games and point to directly, these were, help pave the way for this team to get over the hump and win some tough games.
No, I completely agree with you. And you know what other team proved that in the conference this weekend? Indiana, as flashy as they've been and as sexy, to use your word, as some of their wins have been and dominant. Still, when you look at the scoreboard, a pretty dominant win over Washington. Indiana's 8-0 for the first time since 1967. The first team since 1998, Kansas State, to not trail at any point through the first. Was that the team with Darren Sproles?
I got to look that up. I'm not sure. I thought he's younger than that.
IU delivering in first two challenges of the year, right? Like, that's the thing here. They delivered in the first two. National spotlights on. Game day. Big noon kickoff. Nebraska comes to town. Washington comes to town. And they found a way without Curtis Rourke. Taven Jackson didn't play great, but their defense and their run game, and they battled, and they won. And Indiana, for the doubters out there, if you did blank resume and it didn't say Indiana, they are a top 10 team, and they belong in that conversation with Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. Now, to me, they have proven time and time again, and I find this as much as the blowout, as impressive as it was against Nebraska the previous weekend, to do it without Rourke and needing it. Pons had 2 picks, including a pick 6, and Ellison had the huge second half with Tyson Lawton banged up. He ran the ball 29 times, 123 yards. They've been explosive. They've been efficient. They needed 2 scoring drives of 14 and 19 plays in the drive. Each took more than 7 minutes. They showed that, to me, is right up there for the same reasons we talk about with Penn State. The way Indiana did it this week, still in pretty dominating fashion. Hello, Hoosiers. They're a force to be reckoned with.
You said it last week. I think this was proven right. The reason why you didn't panic about Curtis Rourke missing time and at least didn't pick Washington to win on Saturday was because you said this is a team that's not just quarterback centric. This is a full team. It's a full system here that leads to their success. And Taven Jackson wasn't great again, but the Skulls still scored 31 points, and they got contributions everywhere on the roster. Like you said, Pons, 2 picks, including a pick 6, a big punt return that set them up deep here for another score. Defense played well. They could score quickly in the blink of an eye. They can also grind down the clock, go down the field, 6-7 yards at a time, eat away and just kind of take your soul away. They can beat you in so many different ways, in so many different styles, relying on different players all throughout the roster. They are very well, they are a legitimate team. And to your point, you look at the AP poll, and thankfully, this time next week, or maybe on Tuesday of next week, so just a little bit over a week away, we'll get college football playoff rankings for the first time here. And maybe they'll show Indiana more respect than the AP poll is showing them respect. But they sit here, Trip, at 13. They just won a home game against us. Again, not a great Washington team, but I would say a solid Washington team. They won with their backup quarterback by double digits, and they won every game so far this year by double digits. Yet they didn't move at all. And they are still behind a team like Clemson, who has a loss. And if you want to resume scout, you find me a better win that Clemson has on their resume over Indiana. I can't find one. You look at Iowa State at 11. They're 7-0. Find me a better win that Iowa State has right now over Indiana. The best win Iowa State has is Iowa, who's 5-3, who's going through some quarterback turmoil. We'll get to them here in a little bit. Nice one over Northwestern. But it's like, why you're looking like – it is, I think, partly a real thing here for Indiana of brand bias. Iowa State's been here before and had some success. Clemson, right, has been a national power now for the last decade. Mm-hmm. But you look at Indiana, they are easily a top 10 team. Easily.
Notre Dame lost to NIU at home.
Yeah.
Now they beat the first place SEC team, the only remaining Texas. They did. That's an impressive win on the road.
That is.
But they lost at home to NIU.
It doesn't make any sense. It does not make any sense to me at all. And again, the only hope is that Indiana can get some more respect from the College Football Playoff Committee, which is the poll that matters, right? The AP poll is fun for now, but starting next week, that's irrelevant. It's all about what the College Football Playoff Committee says. We'll see how they review and respect Indiana. But let me ask you, if they won't respect it, maybe we will. Where would you rank Indiana right now? Would you, for a while, we've had them at 4, right? In some sort of order here. Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State was 1, 2, 3. Order them how you will. Would you say right now Indiana has jumped Ohio State, would you put them at 3 in your conference or rankings?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I would.
It's hard because, and this is going to be hypocritical of probably both of us, right? Like, it's hard because when you truly do look on paper, and they've done a nice job of amassing talent and sometimes having a team and experience and the ability to go into games that you've been a winner before, which is what Cignetti brings with him and some of those players from James Madison. It's hard to, I don't want to discount that, but it is really hard to overlook the overall depth and talent at every level, at every position, that and the star power in the first round NFL draft picks that Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State have, and say, okay, Indiana is as good, if not better, than those teams. But because of the consistency they've played with, the efficiency they've played with, the depth they've now shown, the ability to win games in many different facets, and because of injuries on Ohio State's offensive line, and because of recency bias and how things looked this weekend, yeah, I think third, second, first, like, yeah, they belong. They belong. I still don't know. I still don't know that you can differentiate really. I guess Oregon's probably proven to be the best team, and understandably so, and they've gotten better every week, and they just crushed Illinois. We'll get to it real quick. But I don't know how you can really differentiate between probably Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State right now.
Yes, and obviously Penn State this weekend will have a chance to do that. Win or loss, we can kind of move them up or down. But I think right now, like, I would put, like, I'd say, like, if you want to take a cop-out answer, I think they're, like, tied for second. Like, I think Oregon, like you said, is clearly number one. I think with how they've just beaten everyone, really now they've gotten better, and they have that win over Ohio State on their resume, better than anyone else in the conference has. But you look at right now, them and Penn State, I don't see many differentiating factors in the sense of how they've played. We can argue Penn State maybe had a little bit stronger schedule compared to Indiana, but Indiana, like we talked about, is beating everybody by double digits. They're playing great. They have balance on offense in terms of running and passing. They have balance on their team in terms of great offense, great defense. And you look at Ohio State right now, like, I know they'll play in a few weeks, so we'll get an answer, but it's not as simple as, well, Indiana beat Nebraska 56-7 and Ohio State only beat Nebraska 21-17. It's not that simple, but it was back-to-back weeks. So you play a common opponent and they look like two different teams from two different worlds. I think right now Indiana has earned the benefit of the doubt to where if you have a Big Ten rankings here, I would say Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and then Ohio State at 4 here. Right now, at least going this upcoming week, I think they deserve that. So if the AP poll won't give them respect, I think at least in our Big Ten rankings here, I will do that for the Hoosiers. I think they've earned it. They've been tremendous so far this season.
But Oregon, clearly the top team right now in the Big Ten, getting better every week, and to be up 35-3 at halftime against a team that was ranked 20th. And I don't think anyone thought Illinois, because of the mat. Like, it was a lot of times football is not just, overall talent versus overall. It's truly, how does a team match up with another team? This was a bad matchup for Illinois. On the road in Autzen, Oregon wins it 38-9, up 35-3 at halftime. Oregon scored a touchdown on 5 of their first 6 drives, and that was the 6 drives they had in the first half. The impressive thing about this game, number one, their defense's ability to get pressure on Luke Altmaier and make him incredibly uncomfortable. 3 sacks, 9 different players had at least a half tackle for loss. And then their run game and what Oregon did to get back on track running the football, 229 rushing yards. And right, some of these numbers skewed because they didn't really have to play in the second half. Jordan James, 83 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. The impact Noah Whittingham had in that game, running the football and catching the football. And the O-line, only 1 sack allowed. What Oregon did on the offensive line and defensive line was incredibly impressive against a pretty good Illinois team. And they just get better and better and better.
And in the year of parity, right? In the year where we've seen now 3 different number 1 teams go down and lose, it's hard to say right now that Oregon is not head and shoulders better than everyone else in college football. And it's really encouraging if you're a Ducks fan that they are peaking now at the right time. And I still don't think they've played their best football. We had Tyson Alger last week, and he said that after the Ohio State game, he still feels like there's a lot of room for this team to grow and get better. So they're not even really peaking right now because there's still, height on that ceiling for them to go. And so if you look at the drubbing they put on Illinois, what I thought was a guaranteed letdown spot on the road at Purdue, coming off the Ohio State victory here on a short week on the road, and they just lay the hammer down and leave no doubt winning the Ohio State game. They have gotten better really from, let's say, week 3 on, really maybe even week 2 on. They've gotten better every single week. There's still room for them to grow. They just have a consistency right now where, again, offense, defense, passing the ball, running the ball. This team right now looks to be like the favorite to win the national title. And it looks to be like they're going to cruise to Indy, should probably win the Big Ten title game, and should start the playoff now with the number 1 overall seed, have a bye, and really have kind of, be the team to beat in all of college football.
Yeah, and you talk about that from a national perspective, and I think that sets up our guest perfectly here. Matt Fortuna, founder of the Inside Zone, worked with ESPN and The Athletic for a dozen years, and one of, I think, the leading analysts in college football, insider information, like so well connected and really has a grasp on the national scene. So Matt Fortuna, kind enough to join us this week. So let's hear from our conversation with Matt. As we said, Matt Fortuna joining us here, founder of the Inside Zone, co-host of The Independent, a dozen years with ESPN and The Athletic as well. Matt, let's start. You were in Madison on Saturday night, and we were both there for the Penn State Wisconsin game. This is a game, and we want to talk a lot of national stuff, but to see how Penn State found a way to win the game. Like, Oregon's been so flashy, and Indiana's been dominant in the Big Ten this year. Texas, Georgia, Penn State, obviously where they're at in the rankings is in that conversation, but it seems like they've kind of gone about it a different way. A 3-point overtime win in Southern Cal against USC, pushed at home by Bowling Green earlier this year, 21-7 over Illinois, a game that they didn't pull away until the fourth quarter there, but they are undefeated. What were your impressions of seeing Penn State in person and the way they finished that game with a backup quarterback on Saturday?
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. And I'm with you, Brian. I think James Franklin said it best afterward. Like, we're all so close to it that, we come out of here thinking, what could we do better? But, you got to win ugly in college football. And, we'll see what happens this week against Ohio State. But you look at that resume today, even if in the moment it didn't feel great, you've got 3 pretty good road wins. I know none of those teams are ranked, but West Virginia, USC, and Madison, Wisconsin are all tough places to play. I mean, those point spreads, I believe, were all single digits for a reason. And that USC win, again, like, you look at the end, you look at the data, you look at USC's record, it's not going to stand out on paper, but that was a big-time win against a desperate, talented program that forced Penn State to dig deep and make some big plays that they have not had to make or not shown capable of making in the past. I think I learned more about Drew Aller through that uneven effort than I did at any other game through his career so far. So, I think, you've done about as good as you could possibly do so far if you're Penn State. The Illinois won as well. Obviously, Oregon doing what they did to Illinois, I think, takes a little bit of the shine off that win, but that was a top 20, top 25 win, and Illinois' only loss at the time until this past weekend. So, I never got the sense, and maybe you felt differently, Brian, like in the stadium, even with Wisconsin up at halftime, and even with Bo Prabula coming out and not Drew Aller for the second half, it just didn't feel. It felt like Madison. It felt like that town, that stadium was like on edge, right? It's like, can we do this? Can we do this? Oh wait, we got a backup quarterback. Maybe this is our opportunity. And I was glad James Franklin said this afterward. The pick six, I think, completely changed the trajectory. And I felt like that was what Penn State was trying to do, at least early on in the first half. They went, if not 3 and out, both opening drives, close to it. They were unsatisfying drives. They punted both times, pinned a pretty weak Wisconsin offense deep in their own territory. And then they got the big play they needed defensively. And it just felt like once they got the lead and they could play with the lead, this burden was off Bo Prabula's back, and that offense started clicking. It was impressive to see because it was very workmanlike, and they did ultimately what they were supposed to do. And they did it with a backup quarterback. And, Penn State has more athletes than Wisconsin. They have better players than Wisconsin. But I think where that really shows is when you remind yourself that Braden Locke was Wisconsin's backup, and Bo Prabula, who's Penn State's backup, easily won the game against him.
No, I felt the same way watching it on the field, that the lead Wisconsin took, with the exception of their final drive of the opening half, it was kind of fluky how they got there, with a punter on a play that was going to be a blocked punt, right, escaping around the end, Penn State dropping what would have been a touchdown pass. Penn State, even though they trailed at half, was still firmly in control of the game, and there was a hesitancy for the Wisconsin faithful to buy in. You said that you were there earlier this year when Wisconsin played Alabama, just to turn the page on this game and to turn this page on Wisconsin. My understanding from talking to people throughout the course of the week is that there's a lack of a buy-in right now for Luke Fickell. You've been around Luke a ton in your career. Where do you feel like he's at right now with Wisconsin? And it's only year 2. What can he still do with that program?
Yeah, they need that breakthrough win. And I don't know if that's a Luke Fickell problem so much as a Wisconsin program. I mean,
yeah,
Brian, I think we graduated the same year. Wisconsin won the Big Ten title our senior year, and that was the first, if I'm not mistaken, of 3 straight Big Ten titles that Wisconsin won. And it felt like every year they were playing a big game against Ohio State or Michigan or Penn State or whomever, and they were either winning or coming close to winning. Like, those were marquee games you had circled on your calendar. And now, I mean, we got excited for this past game because they won 3 straight coming into it, and they were playing at night. But it's hard to think or remember a time, the last time Wisconsin actually won one of these big games, right? I mean, they've not beaten Penn State, I think, since 2011, if I'm not mistaken. That was back in the Brett Bielema era. So it's a fan base that knows they're a good but not great program. They hired a coach who, in my opinion, is top 5, if not top 3 in the country when you just look at body of work and what Luke Fickell was able to do at Cincinnati. And I think ultimately over time, his way will prevail in the Big Ten. But it feels like you're trying to fit a square peg into the round hole with Phil Longo calling plays in that conference with a roster that he didn't necessarily recruit. Now, you got to remember, again, 2 years in a row, they lose their starting quarterback for the year. Braden Locke is a fine backup quarterback. He's not an elite Big Ten starter, and we saw why, and we saw the difference this past Saturday against Penn State. So I would tell Badger fans to give it some time. Luke Fickell knows what he's doing. I think that program will figure it out eventually and start getting some of these big wins. The other part of it too, I mean, there's a lot of things different about college football this year with the 12-team playoff and mega conferences. The one thing that I think has been most striking to me in real time is just how uneven some of these schedules are within conference. When you look at what Iowa and Indiana has to face compared to like what Wisconsin has to face, it's different. And Wisconsin still has a number of tough games on deck here in the next couple of weeks, right? I mean, they got Iowa, they still got Oregon coming to town, who might be number 1 when they come. Minnesota is always a big rivalry game. So having Alabama in the non-conference didn't help matters in that regard either. I think eventually they will turn it around, but it's going slower than I think any of us imagined.
You look at that win, right, for Penn State, Matt. Now it helps set up what is a top 5 matchup as they welcome Ohio State to town. And I think, like, when you look at it from the Penn State perspective, I think there's real belief in, I think, the team, but also the fan base, that this is actually the year they can finally beat Ohio State for the first time since 2016, in part because the resiliency, I think the mental toughness and the different ways Penn State's won different games in hostile environments this season. But also on the flip side, you look at Ohio State, and with all, the discussions about how much money they spend and the transfer portal and the guys they brought back on defense from last year, there was a real belief of Ohio State, this is the team to beat in college football. And now as we go to this game, you look at how they lost to Oregon a few weeks ago, how they barely were able to squeak by Nebraska with offensive line concerns, not being able to run the ball. Brian and I were talking about before in the pod of like level of concern. My level of concern is very high here for Ohio State going forward. I think there are real flaws they just can't fix. What's your level of concern, Matt, with Ohio State now going forward, kind of seeing the problems they have, and what's kind of your faith that they can kind of patch it up, if not by this week, but by sometime soon?
Yeah, they've still got Indiana, which is going to be a tough game, and they've got Michigan, which I know Michigan's down right now, but that's a rivalry game. It's a rivalry game where all the pressure is going to be on Ohio State because they haven't won it in 4 years. It's weird. Like, Penn State has to go out and do it. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but going into this week and coming out of this past weekend, it does feel like the tables have been turned a little bit. All the pressure's on Ohio State. If they lose, they're probably out of the Big Ten title game. That'll be their second Big Ten loss. they'll be 2 games behind Penn State, 2 behind Indiana, at least until they play them, and 2 behind Oregon as well. The quarterback controversy, if you will. I mean, Will Howard throwing some kerosene onto the rivalry with his comments this past week. You could say the same about Drew Aller if he wanted to, right? I mean, he's an Ohio kid who Ohio State didn't necessarily want, and he ended up at Penn State. There's the quarterback roulette of Penn State this week. Will he or won't he, with Aller starting? And I think the fact that Prabula played as well as he did calms some of the nerves of Penn State fans going into it, thinking they're going to be okay either way. Because I do think Aller's a much better player. Obviously, he's starting. I think what Prabula is able to do in some ways is like exactly what Andy Kotelnicki wants from a quarterback in his offense. He just wants it from a guy who's a little more seasoned and a little bit bigger. But Penn State's ranked higher. Penn State has a better record. Penn State with a loss can probably still make the Big Ten title game. Not that they want to lose this game. All the pressure is on Ohio State. And I just think that is a very interesting and different dynamic, because as big as these games have been in recent past, as much as you can talk yourself into Penn State possibly winning it if you're a Penn State fan, it felt like you had to do some mental gymnastics and hope for a couple things to go wrong to think that Penn State was going to win. Whereas here, I could be wrong, but I think they absolutely can win this game by just being who they are.
No, and it also has changed the narrative because of the 12-team playoff this season around the value, the importance of these games. And I want to go back, to the beginning of the year. You obviously have expectations and how things are going to play out. And there's still a lot of unknowns, and we're curious to see how this thing continues to evolve over the course of the rest of the year. But in this new 12-team playoff format, when you talk about a Georgia-Texas game, an Oregon-Ohio State game, a Penn State-Ohio State game, how has the playoff and the new format, do you think, changed college football? And has it played out where I think there were a lot of people who thought, oh, this is going to devalue some of the regular. I was not in that camp, but there were some people that thought this is going to devalue those type of games. How has it played out to this point compared to maybe the expectations that you've had going in and the way we are viewing this college football season?
Yeah, I think every game still matters. It just might not be like life and death, so to speak, to use a really extreme analogy. Like Georgia losing Alabama in most years would have ended their season. Now, I think the fallout of that has had more to do with Alabama than it has Georgia, because Georgia has continued to win. But if you're Penn State, I mean, this is a huge game. I mean, it's a marquee game. You look at the schedule this year, you look at the roster this year, and look, it's a blue blood program. I don't want to say if not now, then when, because that's not reality. But you got a really down USC team. You don't have Michigan this year, which usually is a tough opponent. You don't have Indiana, which this year would have been a tough opponent. And you get Ohio State at home. You don't get Oregon. This is a game I think Penn State is capable of winning. If they win it, they have a chance to, at the very least, play in the Big Ten title game. And you're going to be in the playoff if you're in that game no matter what. If you win it, you're going to get a bye. If you lose it, you're probably going to get a home playoff game, which I think you talk about home field advantages. You want to go, if you're from the South or West, you want to go to State College, Pennsylvania, the week before Christmas, where the weather could be God knows what. So I think there are a lot at stake with all these games. I just don't know if we've all processed how much in real time, because we don't know how the committee is going to react. We don't know how they're going to slot these teams. I do think, having home field advantage is just going to be so significant for whoever gets it, those 5 through 8 seeds. And I think the bye is going to be significant, obviously, as well, because if you want to win a national championship, you're going to have to play a lot of football games. And it's ultimately going to be survival of the fittest.
Matt, I'm curious your thoughts, because we don't have many national folks on who cover the sport. And Brian and I are kind of confused in terms of the respect level and how people perceive Indiana. They're 8-0. They won every game by double digits. They have really done nothing outside of just the fact that their schedule is maybe not as strong as others here. They've done really nothing to leave any doubt. But yet here we are, you see them at the AP poll, they're 13th. I guess maybe from your perspective, you're looking at the entirety of the sport. How much are you believing in Indiana as a team that can, make the playoff as a true contender here in college football, and is truly maybe one of the better teams in all the sport?
I have no choice but to believe in them, at least as a playoff contender. I mean, at this point, they're 8-0. They'll be favored in every game, I think, outside of the Ohio State game the rest of the regular season. Again, if you're 11-1, you're probably getting into that Big Ten title game. It depends what happens elsewhere. but it's hard not to believe in them, right? And now, am I saying they're going to win a national championship? No. Am I saying their schedule is murderer's row? No. I believe it's ranked 91st in strength of schedule right now, according to Jeff Sagarin. So what? They've won every game, and they've won every game for the most part decisively. I mean, look at college football is a really bad sport to do like the transitive property with, but look what they did to Nebraska versus what Ohio State did to Nebraska, right?
Yeah.
And look what they did to Washington with the backup quarterback. If they get Curtis Rourke back and he's at relatively full health, I mean, I think he's an NFL caliber quarterback. I think he's a guy who won the MAC Player of the Year 2 years ago, took a step back last year, but now surrounded by all that talent is really letting, his arm show. I mean, they've got a good group of receivers. Obviously, Kirk Cinetti is a hell of a coach. For all the funny quotes and comments he has, he brought so many guys with him from JMU. And I just think when you're at a place like Indiana that statistically is the losingest program in FBS history, when you just fill that building up with guys who have done nothing but win, even if it's at a smaller level, I just think there's an attitude change. And again, they're not just getting by here. They have not trailed in a game all season long. They are dominating their competition. Would I love to see them play an Ohio State or a Penn State or a Notre Dame? Sure. Who wouldn't? I got asked on my Notre Dame podcast who would win in the state title game this year. And Notre Dame fans were like appalled at the idea of even entertaining the question, but it absolutely merits discussion at the very least, because Indiana has earned the right this season to be in that situation. So, look, I'm a believer as far as I think they can win 10 or 11 games and be one of the top 12 teams and make the playoff this year. Will they make a run? Probably not. But again, I've never seen this before, right? The losingest team in the sports history, which won 3 games last year, is just absolutely boat racing everybody right now.
Yeah, they haven't even trailed all season. Matt, you're talking about the committee and the rankings. What can we learn next week? What do you think we can learn anything when the first rankings are released next week?
It's a good question, because a lot of times with the 4-team era, it felt like they were making it up as they went along, right? I remember I mean, there were a number of controversial weekly picks, but they had Michigan ranked over Michigan State the one year right after Michigan State beat them, and Michigan State had a better record. So there are always a few things that don't necessarily add up for those of us. I do think we'll learn, though, like what they value in terms of schedules and what they value in terms of win-loss records. I thought, one of the really bad things they did in the final year was put Liberty into the college football playoff without playing a Power 5 team, because there were a lot of Group of 5 programs who looked at it and said, well, why don't we just schedule like if we're going to get a playoff bid or playoff check? And Liberty was in position to do that again this year. Obviously, they ended up losing, and I think Kennesaw State does everyone in the sport a favor by beating them and not letting us entertain that conversation anymore this year. But it's going to be interesting just to see what they value. How high is Boise State, right? I mean, that's a team that's the front runner to be the Group of 5 champion, a team that took Oregon to the limit. And at the time, we're thinking, what's wrong with Oregon? When in reality, that's a really good loss, as much as you can have one right now. So how do they look at the Group of 5? How do they look at a team like Indiana, who's dominant but hasn't really played anyone? What do they do with a team like Ohio State, right? Especially coming off this Penn State game, even if they win it, which they're supposed to, according to Vegas. Is that a team that's played up to its expectation and played the greatest schedule in the world? I guess if you put Penn State in there with Oregon, you probably do have a strong schedule, but it's not. They have not looked like the preseason national title contender that we thought they would. So we'll see. Both the Big Ten and the SEC are going to be jockeying to get 4 teams apiece in there. I think one of them ultimately will. Does that mean Indiana's the odd man looking out, right, among Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State? We'll see. It's going to be very, very exciting. And the ACC too, right? I mean, it looks like the best team in the ACC. They got killed by Georgia, and there are multiple undefeated teams in conference play there right now between Miami, Pittsburgh, and SMU. So how does the committee ultimately view that conference?
And this ultimately is why the SEC and Big Ten are lobbying for 4 guaranteed spots, because in a year like this, you could have a BYU and an Iowa State, a Pitt, Miami, Clemson. There are these conferences that are trying to steal bids from and the belief is from many fans, from many people that cover the sport, that even if there's a 2-loss Ohio State, a 3-loss Ohio State, that they would still beat any of those Big 12 or ACC teams, and begs the question, how long does this format remain and how long do we see it in its current state? And I don't know that anyone knows.
Yeah, it'll probably go to 14. I think, they do want to let things play out and see what happens here. I'm just ready, like, just as a fan of the sport, I'm ready for the Big 12 and ACC to call the Big 10 and SEC's bluff. Be like, all right, it's on you. You want to ruin the sport? Go hijack it. Just start your own league. Go for it. Everyone's going to hate you. Everyone, right? Like, I don't know what that means for the future of the ACC and Big 12, but I do know that everyone in that sport cares about perception. And I do know that Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, does not want to be known as the guy who killed college football. So I'd be curious to see how that plays out. I think this is a sport that, like anything you compete in, needs to be earned on the field. I don't think either conference needs a guaranteed number of anything, because if they're as good as we all think they are, they'll go out there and prove it. And so I just kind of hate that discussion of, like, they need X number of bids while this conference only gets that number of bids. Like, no, I mean, that's why we play the games, right? Like, I must be an idiot because I thought Alabama was going to kill Vanderbilt. Well, upsets happen. You got to earn it.
Yeah. Matt, where are you heading this week? Any games this week you going to?
I'll be home on the couch. Way too good of a schedule to not be monitoring all of it. So have fun in State College. Try to avoid the Secret Service for me while you're out there, and hope that one's a good one on the field.
Yeah, I'll be leaving my house to go a whole 2 miles at about 6 a.m., I think, just to beat the traffic. You know what that's like all too well.
Unfortunately, I do.
Matt, thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
Ryan, we've both known Matt for a really long time, not only one of the great writers and reporters covering college football, very, very well connected and respected, but someone we've known for a really long time, one of the good guys in the sport as well. I know we want to get to hot or not next year, but I mentioned it a couple of times. Spa weekend. Did you feel refreshed coming into the podcast today?
Can I say something crazy? I did not. I did not feel. I actually felt more tired. Sunday, I went to the spa. Okay, so for those, you want to. Okay, let's think. Well, first of all, here, I know you want to see it. That's the picture.
For our YouTube audience, they can see.
For our YouTube audience, and if you're listening, wherever you do get your pods, number one, thank you. Make sure you do subscribe to YouTube, where you can see some of these great pictures we have today. Posted a picture on social media Sunday night of myself in a robe.
Great
had a
fade.
on.
New haircut. The fade may be it may be a little drastic, we'll say. It's not exactly, let's say, faded in. It's more just kind of cut off. Anyway, it was my girlfriend and I's anniversary. And shockingly, she did not want many
to
years?
spend 7 years.
Wow.
She has dealt with me for 7 years.
That begs the question. Where is okay? No, go ahead. Continue.
So I couldn't believe, ready for this? She did not want to spend her Saturday celebrating our anniversary, watching college football games all day, like we do every single weekend. I couldn't believe it. So I said, okay, fine. We'll go to the spa. It's your day. We'll make sure we'll do what you want to do. So we ended up going to a spa, which is the genesis of this nice photo. That was where we got a little foot massage, or getting ready for the foot massage. But it was very nice. But I will say, despite the fact that there was like a million saunas you go into, steam rooms, hot pools, foot massage here, like, the little under eye mask, had a facial mask as well. I felt more tired afterwards.
Well, it's because you were relaxed. I think you're supposed to.
Really?
I think you're supposed to feel like you were able to unwind and disconnect. So did you, we're getting your expert opinion here on college. Did you watch the games?
Of course.
Okay.
Oh, I spent a lot of Saturday night, a lot of Sunday morning, catching up, reading, watching it. She owes me big here. I put a lot of overtime in. But yes, so that is partly, and it was only part of the Saturday, I will say, but that's where, that's for where that photo came. And I guess learned something new. Yeah. They had water beds, which was really nice as well. Very comfy.
Let's move on.
All righty. That's a nice segue to hot or not. How about that, Trip? So that was my Saturday. Let's talk about your Saturday here.
Yeah.
We built up the environment. This was your first trip to Madison. Night game, number 3 team in the country coming to town. That should have provided here a great environment. And so I'm going to get your thoughts, because at least for me watching the game, the environment did not jump out off the TV. It was not as loud. I've been to Madison. It gets loud, right? When they're into it, they're into it. It's one of the best home field environments in the Big Ten. So maybe this is a hot take. You tell me, hot or not. And that's actually the game here. Hot or not. I have a take. Is it a hot take or is it an accurate take? The voice of reason is Brian Chip. He will decide on that. Hot or not, you were disappointed. Or put it this way. Let me actually phrase it correctly. Hot or not. The environment at Wisconsin Saturday night was disappointing.
That's an accurate take. I think there was cautious optimism going into the game, but after the way they performed against Alabama earlier in the year, Wisconsin fans were hesitant to jump on board. And early in the game, night game, you think everyone's going to be engaged every single play. Then you hit kind of that lull in the second quarter. The fans really weren't loud until a big third down or until something really good happened. I thought they got into it at times during the second and third quarter when they had the lead. But overall, and it's unique because the stands, even the student section, is really far back from the field, the way the stands are set up there. I didn't think it got that loud, and noise was certainly not a factor in the game. And maybe it's just from being on the field instead of in the stands with the stands bouncing. All this build up to between the third and fourth quarters, and it's a tight game. I think a 1-point game at the time, and jump around. And, after they play it lasts about a minute, and sure, people are jumping and it's going crazy, but kind of underwhelming. Cool tradition, but kind of underwhelming as well. Environment did not play a factor in the game, and it was a little disappointing. I've been to a lot, and it is certainly nowhere near top environments in college football that I've been to. Maybe it was a bad night for the Badger fans. Maybe it was a bad night, but not one of the best environments I've been to.
That shouldn't be the case. Look, I get it. The last time a big team came to town, Alabama, you got stomped out, smoked. That game was over pretty early. And you have your backup quarterback in Braden Lock-in. So but
the student section wasn't filled, and like the concourses are narrow. Getting down from the press box to the field was, for me, I felt like I was trying to find a fullback in a day and age where you don't have fullbacks anymore, and I needed one. I get that there's logistical, but the student section wasn't even filled until the second quarter.
Last thing here about the environment. How much of that has to do with a belief or lack thereof of Luke? Is this reflection at all of Luke Fickell?
I think so. I do. And Luke Fickell had a 4th and 1 and punted. I think he was right around midfield second quarter or maybe early third quarter and punted. When you're the underdog, and this has been a consistent theme, the criticism of him is in big games, knowing you're the underdog, not going for the win. And I think that was the type of decision you could hear some of the fans groaning, and maybe more than that, okay, come on here.
Right.
We got a chance to do something. We're just satisfied with repeating the same thing over. It's only his second year, but if there's already that notion around him and how patient can places be, I think there's a hesitancy to buy into Luke Fickell right now from Wisconsin fans.
That's concerning. Again, there are other factors, right? Again, you're with a backup quarterback. You're trying to overhaul what was a pro-style, run-heavy offense to more of a spread, modern college football offense. That's not a change you can make overnight. So I think there is patience needed. But I just think, in terms of excitement, energy from the fans, we've been to games where the home team is the underdog, but it's still a big team comes to town, you're juiced. And especially, Trip, it's not like Penn State put them out of their misery. They're losing at halftime. It's a 1-point game and going to the fourth quarter. That's right there, all in like that. That's we have a chance to win this game. To not really get in, and again, I'm glad it's not just me. It jumped off the TV kind of early. I'm just I've been there. It gets loud. It's hostile. We've seen plenty of big Wisconsin games where the crowd plays a factor. To not and kind of be a zero here, disappointing for sure here. Who's not been disappointing? Oregon. We kind of just talked about before here. I think for me, they're my national title favorite. So I'll ask you, Trip, hot or not, Oregon is the favorite in all college football right now to win the national title.
Yeah, they have to be. They've been getting better every week. Dylan Gabriel's playing at an elite level right now. They have the wide receivers. They have a running game. They have an offensive line, a defensive line. Oregon, because of what they've done so far this season, they are definitely the best team in college football right now.
Let's talk about a game we've not yet talked about so far. Michigan State. The Wolverines do win. They win the Paul Bunyan Trophy. They win 24-17 over Sparty here. And we saw another quarterback change. Jack Tuttle not injured, or was injured, I should say, not healthy enough to play. So insert again, Davis Warren. Solid game.
Back to the start.
13-19, 123 yards, 1 touchdown. We go right back, like you said, to the top here. Third different starting, or I guess now fourth different starting quarterback for Michigan. We said this before, so we'll say it again here. Hot or not, Michigan should stick with Davis Warren for the rest of the season.
Not a hot take. I think that was the best they've looked in a long time. In a game we both thought Michigan State would win, and Michigan State did some good things. Yeah, and absolutely had chances too. Michigan State ran the ball pretty well in that game, surprisingly. But yeah, they need to stick with Davis. Just stick with someone at this point, and stick with Davis Warren.
And they did have a nice little change up at Alex Orji, who ran the ball a lot better. He ran the ball the best he did all season, and maybe that change up kind of helps a little bit more.
I think that's how you do it.
So there it is. So all right, Michigan maybe for at least 1 week has found their answer to quarterback. Speaking of quarterback, let's go back to Penn State, Wisconsin here, Trip. We saw Drew Aller play well in the first half, get hurt. Bo Prabula come in, have a really strong fourth quarter, helps Penn State pull away. Hot or not, Penn State can beat Ohio State on Saturday with either quarterback.
Not hot take. I think if they have to go with Bo Prabula, and James Franklin said it's going to be, as we were recording this, having his press conference, that it would be a game time decision with Drew Aller and Dennis Sutton, that they don't need to give Aller reps during the week because he's a veteran quarterback and has been around. He said it would be a game time decision, and I would not expect them to tip their hand. So I think that's good news for Penn State fans. It's not a significant long-term injury, that at least it's a game time decision. But I think they can. I think they can beat Ohio State with either quarterback, especially the way Prabula played against Wisconsin and what they'd be able to do from a game plan. I mean, if you're Ohio State, now you have to prepare for what the offense looks like with Aller, and you'd have to prepare for Prabula anyway. But now, if you're facing Prabula for an entire game, what that Kotelnicki offense could look like.
You're right, and I'm with you. I think once he settled down, you saw a different Bo. He's more calm. I thought he made really good reads, not only in the run game, in the passing game as well, which is the big question. We know he can run the ball really well, but I thought he made some good decisions, good passes, stood in the pocket, took some big hits, but delivered strikes down the field. Again, that's why I kind of put it out there. I think Penn State can win this game with either quarterback. Glad to hear you agree. Speaking of quarterbacks, let's go to Iowa. They made a quarterback change. They benched Cade McNamara in a game in which they were losing to Northwestern. They put in Brendan Sullivan. And you look at Brendan Sullivan's stats, wasn't crazy. Nothing jumps off the page. 9 of 14, 79 yards, added 41 rushing yards on a touchdown. But Iowa scored 35 points the rest of the game with Sullivan in, helped unlock the run game. They beat Northwestern 40-14. Hot or not, Iowa should stick with Brendan Sullivan as QB for the rest of the season.
That is, again, for someone who's the king of the hot takes, I don't think that's a hot take either.
Wow.
This was a 7. I didn't have a chance to see the game because I was on the air for the Penn State pregame, but I looked up and it was 7-5 at the end of at the end of the second quarter. And all of a sudden it was 40-14 before you knew it. I thought this was trending to be one of those epic Big Ten clashes that was going to end 12-10 or something like that. I think they should stick with Brendan Sullivan at quarterback because at this point, you know what McNamara is, you know where he's at in his career. And this was obviously something that gave them a little more life on an offense that still has not been solved in 2024.
And you've seen at least the run game to unlock. When you have a mobile threat, I thought Caleb Johnson's holes he was able to run through were a lot wider and better when you have a mobile threat. So if you're Iowa, there's no reason to go back to Cade McNamara. Figure out what you have in Brendan Sullivan and see how the rest of the season plays out. All right, let's turn it up here. We've been agreeing too much here. Rutgers, Friday night, late night here. If you stuck around and stayed up here to watch that game, it was a USC domination. And now Rutgers, after starting 4-0, has dropped 4 straight games, and they've been outscored in that stretch 133-66. Doubled up. Not pretty whatsoever. So you look at Rutgers, 4-4. Minnesota on the schedule this week, at Maryland, Illinois, at Michigan State. Hot or not, Rutgers will not finish this season bowl eligible.
Well, in today's day and age of college football, you can be 5-7 and qualify for a bowl game. I think Rutgers will still be bowl. I think they'll be in a bowl game.
Okay. And like a real true, like 6 wins, they earn it sort of thing. Not like we ran out of bowl teams, like you said, 5-7. Are you taking the technical? You can't, all right. Play for the spirit of the rule here. Because yes, we've seen 5-7 teams. The spirit of the rule, 6-6. Can they get to 6 wins here and go 2-2 in a 4-game stretch? Minnesota, Maryland, at Maryland, Illinois, at Michigan State.
Well, they play the 2 best teams at home and the 2 worst teams on their schedule remaining on the road. Yeah, sure. They finished 2-2. They finished 6-6. Sure. I'm just doing that to. I don't know. Quite honestly, if you're a Rutgers fan, I don't know that you really care at this point. You just want this thing to end.
It's like the acronym for Jets, just end the season. That's what it is for Rutgers here. Just forget it. Just get me through November.
And probably a lot of Rutgers fans are Jets fans. Probably Mets fans too.
Getting spanked by USC late night on Friday. Watch the Jets lose to the Patriots on Sunday. That's a rough weekend for Rutgers Jets fans. Yeah, I don't have a lot of faith. Sorry, Rutgers fans. Good start 4-0. I don't think it's going to end in
5-7.
5-7. Real
5-7
eligibility.
5-7.
How about Minnesota? Spanked Maryland. Played really well here. They're playing some good football. They now 5 wins on the season. Their last 4 games at Illinois, at Rutgers. They host Penn State, at Wisconsin. 3 out of the last 4 games here are on the road. Minnesota, though, hot or not, will get to 7 wins on the season.
Yeah, they might be the 5th best team in the Big Ten. Should have beaten North Carolina to start the season. Max Brosmer got them in field goal range, missed a kick. Obviously, fell way behind at Michigan, then had a call go against them at the end. Brosmer had that awesome game this week, 320 yards, 4 touchdowns. Daniel Jackson had a big game. Elijah Spencer had a big game, both catching 2 touchdowns, both at or near 100 yards receiving. Darius Taylor in the run game, solid defense. Yeah, I think they get to 7 wins. I don't think that's a hot take at all. I'll give you a hot take. I think they might be the 5th best team in the Big Ten, outside of the top 4 that we talked about.
You would say right now they're better than Illinois.
I think it'd be a tremendous game. I think it's going to be a tremendous game when they play right here. Right? That's the next game at Illinois.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Let me just double check here to make sure there's no bye week involved. But I'm very listen. I think it's going to be a very close game here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Minnesota's head and shoulders, the lesser team here. I would favor Illinois to win that game, but I think it's a real conversation. I think it's fair. Like they're right now a top 5. I would say comfortably top 6 team. But credit to them because we were just talking about them before the year. I thought they're a little bit better maybe than advertised, and maybe their over-under win total is a little bit low. But we're talking best-case scenario here. I don't know, the 12th, 11th, maybe 10th best team in the conference. And here they are. Like, they're knocking on the door. If you can beat Illinois this week, you're firmly there at number 5. You're kind of that first team in the next grouping in the Big Ten. That's incredible. I think they do get to 7 wins here. I think they're playing some good football. I know it's kind of a tough stretch, again, with 3 of the last 4 games on the road. I think they go 2-2. I think they can get to 7-5, and that would be a really successful season for PJ Fleck and Minnesota. All right, that'll do for hot or not. I will say a little disappointing here. I thought we'd have more disagreements, and I thought your hot take was honestly the strongest one of Minnesota being the 5th best team. I got to improve my game here.
But maybe it's maturation. Maybe it's being calm, cool, and collected after a spa weekend.
Maybe that's it. Maybe you're right about that. Wow. Maybe I need a spa weekend more then. The hot takes, just kind of like the sweat and the stress, just flow right on out.
Good episode. Right. I enjoyed this.
This was a lot of fun. Big thank you to Matt Fortuna, obviously, for joining us. But Trip, I'm excited for this week. We're going overdrive this week. We have a top 5 matchup at Happy Valley. You'll have big noon kickoff there. You'll have college game day there as well. Number 3, number 4. And we're not just going to give you the normal Monday, Thursday pod. Oh, no. We're going overdrive here as well. Very excited. Keep an eye out here. And this is why you got to subscribe on YouTube and also wherever you get your pods here. We got some bonus preview coming this week here for both Ohio State and Penn State's perspectives. We're talking to former players. We're getting their perspective not only on this season, but also going down memory lane here as well to tease it for Ohio State fans. We have former captain and national champion Joshua Perry coming out. We're going to record that on Wednesday. So you can give us a great insight as the 2014 national title team was just honored this past weekend against Nebraska. That was obviously the last national title team Ohio State's had. We'll get his thoughts on that season, what it takes to be a true national title contender, And if he sees that right now, those kind of makings of this Ohio State team this year, Trip, I'm excited. This is going to be a really fun week leading up to this big time game.
I'm speechless almost. I don't know what to say. Yeah, you can actually use the word big. Like, this is big. This is big.
Are you saying that I've used
some
the word
people,
big in previous weeks that's not warranted that?
Some people in attendance may say this is huge.
I see what you did there. Took me a second. It's a big game. It is an absolute. Let me ask you really fast here too.
Oh boy.
Oh, we'll save it for Thursday. Okay. Because we're gonna get into that game a lot here.
Yeah.
So again, we got some bonus material coming your way. So make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. Make sure you are subscribing wherever you get your pods, and make sure you tell your friends about us. This is gonna be a really fun, in-depth episode here. We got some big games, not just Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan. We just talked about Minnesota, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really big games here in the Big Ten this week that we're gonna break down. So appreciate you tuning in and listening to us here. Breakdown this week, number 9. We'll talk to you later on this week right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.